Luma and the Song of the Dolphins. Luma woke beside a quiet cove where the water breathed against pale sand and the air carried the soft taste of salt and sunlight that had not yet climbed the sky. She opened her eyes and listened to the long hush that belongs to a coast before the day begins in earnest, and she felt a friendly pull from the sea, as if the tide itself had leaned a little closer to invite her. Her fur held the cool of the night, and the small light at the tip of her tail rested like a patient star in her own keeping, and she stood and walked slowly across the beach where small shells wrote delicate lines and tiny crabs had left neat trails that curved and vanished at the lip of the water. Luma paused and watched the surface where a silver flicker moved and then another, and in that flicker she felt a message that was not a word yet was clear. "Come and learn the wide language of water," it seemed to say, "and bring your quiet heart." She stepped into the shallows and felt the sea accept her pause the way a friendly hand accepts another. She moved until the water buoyed her chest and shoulders, and the cool wrapped her in an even calm. Below her the sand gave way to seagrass that swayed with a rhythm older than any story, and schools of small fish turned together so gently that their movement was a single mood. A shape appeared just beyond the reach of foam and then came nearer with a smooth arc, and Luma saw a dolphin whose eyes shone with a kind humor that needed no proof. The dolphin surfaced with a soft rush of air and looked at her, and the look said, "You may come with us if you will listen to currents and follow without hurry." Luma nodded with a small tilt of her head and let her legs float out and let her body grow long and balanced, and the dolphin turned toward the deeper blue and moved. They entered a broad path where the sea gathered itself into a slow shining river, and the dolphin guided her along its line. Another dolphin joined, and then a third, and soon Luma moved inside a small company whose motions were so graceful that the water felt like music set to the scale of breath. Her paws made small strokes that matched the gentle pulses of her companions, and every time she relaxed her shoulders the water lifted her a little more, and every time she softened her neck the water guided her to the easiest place. The dolphins rose and drew an easy arc that brought them into light, and then they slipped below the surface again, and the world became quiet and clear and full of cool brightness. Sunlight played along the top in coins and ribbons, and the coins drifted over her face, and then over the sand below, and the ribbons braided themselves through long grass and over pale stones. One dolphin came close and traced a slow circle around Luma, and she felt the soft pressure of the water change and understood that the circle was a lesson in how to turn without strain. She followed and discovered that a wide turn gives the body time to change its mind, and that there is no need to decide quickly when the sea is willing to hold you in the pause. Another dolphin brushed past with a flick of a fin and made a tiny spiral that lifted a strand of seagrass and set it floating, and Luma laughed in the quiet way of a creature whose mouth does not open wide, but whose chest knows joy. They moved toward a darker band where the floor of the cove fell into a deeper room, and the water cooled and grew clear as glass, and the sound of the surface became a memory. Here the dolphins showed her how to rest while moving and how to move while resting, and the lesson felt like the simple wisdom of a long day that knows when to be still. They came upon a garden of rocks shaped by patient time, and every edge had been made gentle by the touch of waves again and again. Anemones opened like tiny hands and closed and opened again, and the light that fell through the surface reached them in trembling patterns that made the rocks look as if they breathed. A turtle drifted through the garden with a slow certainty that belonged to the deep, and turned its head to regard Luma, and then continued with the ease of one who knows that there is more day than hurry. Luma matched the pace and felt something in her own chest slow to meet it, and the dolphins approved with small clicks that felt like friendly notes. Sand ripples marched along the floor in gentle rows, and small rays passed and drew pale signatures before the next swell erased them with kindness. Farther out they reached a field of bright water where the sun leaned down and made the top of the sea glitter as if a million small bells had chosen to be light instead of sound. The dolphins rose in unison, and the air met them with a soft kiss, and for a moment Luma saw the broad sweep of coast and a long line of birds that moved along it, and then they all went under again, and the world narrowed to the long room of blue that had no corners. They glided side by side, and Luma felt that she had become part of a chord that stayed true even as the notes changed. A curiosity moved within her, and she wondered whether the sea could remember a traveler after the traveler left, and the dolphins answered by turning as one toward a channel whose floor shone like a river of glass. A gentle current carried them and did most of the work, and Luma learned that the kindest way is often the most skillful way, and that patience is not empty at all but full of the strength of what it trusts. They reached a place where rock walls rose on either side and made a hallway of stone and light. Water ran past with the regular hush of a steady breath, and at the far end a brighter door of color shone, where the sea opened into a lagoon. When they passed through that door, the world changed again. The lagoon was calm and wide and shallow near the edges and deeper in the middle, and the sand there was as white as a quiet thought. Sea grass waved in long meadows and tucked small fish into its folds, and a school of silver herring ran like a river that had made a choice to be many rather than one. The dolphins showed her how to skim the surface with very small movements so that the water barely noticed, and how to pause without sinking by letting air rest inside the body in a smooth way. They played a little game where Luma would follow a line the dolphins drew, and then she would close her eyes and trust that her paws would keep the line even with her heart. Every time she opened her eyes, she found that she had not strayed, and the dolphins clicked their approval and made a small leap together that threw a sparkling veil over the lagoon for the joy of it. Luma felt that the water had begun to speak to her in a language she could now understand, and that the words were shapes and pressure and temperature and brightness. She listened and heard that the sea loved to carry and did not mind being asked to help when the one who asked was gentle. They visited a sandbar where tiny birds ran on the edge between wet and dry with such quick feet that they seemed to float above their own shadows. A heron stood at the calmest bend and let the tide polish its legs, and the heron looked at Luma, then closed its eyes as if to say that stillness can be a reply. Clouds passed like slow ships, and their reflections rolled over the lagoon and made the bottom look as if it were traveling though it was still. Luma floated on her back and gazed upward and felt the water cradle her spine like a wise friend, and she breathed and let her ribs rise and fall, and the sea breathed with her. Nothing pressed and nothing pulled, and in that easy middle she thought that rest is not the absence of movement but the presence of trust. In the late part of the afternoon the dolphins guided her to the mouth of a channel that led out toward open water, and the floor dropped again to a soft blue depth. A slow voice moved through the water far below them, and she felt it more than heard it, and understood that a great whale traveled somewhere beyond sight, and that its call rolled through the sea like a bell rolling through a cathedral. The dolphins changed course and the whale never came closer, and that was fine, because even a distant presence can be enough. On the floor below a field of star shapes decorated the sand, and the small creatures moved with tidy purpose from one grain to the next as if measuring a map. The sunlight leaned toward gold, and long lanes of brightness crossed the blue and made it look like a tapestry hung in a hall with tall windows. Evening began to arrive. The dolphins swam toward a quiet cove where the water would grow dark in a friendly way and where the shore rose with rocks that kept the wind in a careful balance. Luma felt that the sea now knew her and that she knew the sea just enough to behave well within it. They circled once in a slow ring and then stilled near the surface, and Luma floated among them, and the small light at her tail cast a pale glow that drifted down and brushed the sand like a lazy lantern. Something answered from the water itself, a faint green sparkle that woke and slept and woke again, and the dolphins moved a little and the sparkle followed their curves like quiet laughter. Bioluminescence gathered where they touched the sea, and Luma watched the night paint their motions with living light. When a dolphin curved below her, its back wrote a path of green fire, and when it turned, the line folded over itself and then faded as if it had been accepted back into the broader dark. She reached out a paw and drew a simple circle in the surface, and the circle glowed, and then sank and then became part of the calm again. The dolphins made patterns as if drawing a kind alphabet meant only for water and for those who are kindly. The cove answered with small lights that ran up and down the rocks and then settled to a thoughtful glow. They rested together with quiet hearts, and Luma felt her body become very heavy and also very light, the way a body can be when it is held in a place that asks nothing more of it. She thought of the morning on the sand when the invitation first arrived, and she thought of the long river of light under the surface, and of the turtle and the heron, and of the whale that spoke like a far bell. She remembered the lesson that a wide turn gives time, and that patience helps the water do its work, and that trust is a way of moving. The dolphins drew near, and one placed its forehead lightly against her shoulder, and in that touch she felt the kindest farewell. They would travel on along the coast while the night deepened, and she would return to the sand to sleep, and the sea would keep them all in one great room even while each rested in a different corner. Luma swam slowly to the shore and climbed from the water and stood with droplets running along her fur and into the sand. The tide sighed and reached for her paws and then let go as if to say that she could come and go as she pleased. She walked to a hollow among the dunes where beach grass leaned together to make a small roof, and she lay down while the world arranged itself for sleep. The moon rose from behind a low cloud and placed a silver path upon the water, and on that path she imagined the dolphins traveling with their quiet grace, and she thanked them without words. She closed her eyes, and the memory of gliding returned not as motion, but as peace, and her breath matched the tide, and every exhale brushed the sand of her thoughts smooth. The night became softer, and she allowed it to be large and kind. If a thought arrived saying it wished to ask a question, she welcomed it and let it sit, and then she watched as the question forgot itself and became a calmer thing. She imagined the garden of rocks beneath the lagoon and saw a turtle fold its flippers and float like a wise leaf, and she imagined the heron standing as still as a walking stick planted in shallow water. She listened for the bell-like voice that had rolled from the deep and felt that the sea had more songs than she would ever hear, and that this was a joyful truth. She let her shoulders empty, she let her paws grow heavy, she let her jaw soften and her chest loosen, and in that ease the whole beach seemed to sigh along with her. Dream drifted toward her like a tide that chooses the gentle path into a bay. In that dream she moved beside the dolphins again, and this time she did not need to be carried on any back, because the dream gifted her with the exact buoyancy that suits a fox in water, and she made long slow strokes that felt like the strokes of a painter who has found the color that matches a memory. She turned when they turned, and when the sea said rest she rested, and when the sea said look she looked, and when the sea said enough she agreed. She crossed a field of light that glittered like scales, and when she looked down she saw not fish, but the bright ideas and small kindnesses of 1,000 waking lives resting on the floor until morning. She understood that the sea keeps such things safe because it has space for them and the patience to return them when the world is ready. Her dream carried her past the mouth of a river that poured a silver ribbon into the coast, and past boats that rocked without complaint, and past a lighthouse whose beam turned in a slow promise. She swam into a cave that held a pool as still as a held breath, and she touched the surface with her paw and made one ring and then another, and the rings went to the walls and the cave gave them back, a soft light. She rose to breathe, and the opening of the cave framed the sky like a painting in a quiet room, and then she drifted out, and the dolphins waited without impatience. They told her without speaking that some journeys are made of returning, and that the paths of returning are as worthy as the paths of setting out. She accepted this and rested, and the dream rested with her. When morning finally began, she woke in the dune hollow with sand nestled into her fur like cool sugar, and the air held the scent of tide pools and sea lavender. She stood and stretched, and the sky brightened, and small birds drew punctuation marks in the margin where earth met air. The sea lay unrolled to the horizon, and a thin line of light sat there as if someone had placed a ribbon on the edge between day and night. Luma walked to the water and touched it with a paw and felt that the sea remembered her and had kept a place for her. She looked along the coast for the line of her companions and knew that even if she did not see them, they were near, because the morning had the same steady patience that had carried them all day. She turned inland and followed a path of packed sand between mounds of grass, and every few steps she paused to listen in case the sea wished to add one more instruction. It offered only its regular breath, and that was enough. Along the path a small fox track crossed her own, and she smiled at the thought of another traveler who might one day meet the dolphins when the time was right. At the crest of the dune she looked back and saw two graceful bodies lift and fall and lift again in the line where the waves curled, and she bowed her head in thanks so that the gratitude would shine quietly rather than bright. Then she went on to find a place to rest where the ground remembered shade and where dry grass would be a gentle bed. All that day she carried the sense of water around her like a light shawl, and when she lay down the sense became a blanket, and when she closed her eyes the blanket became the sea itself. In her chest she kept a new rhythm that had been given by long blue rooms and by friends who speak in whistles and clicks, and by the way a current lends its arms when you stop trying to swim against it. She allowed the rhythm to become her breath, and that breath to become a promise that whenever she needed to sleep she would call upon the sea within her, and the sea would gather her thoughts as it gathers shells and set them in neat lines and then smooth the lines away. The sun walked its path and folded itself into the west, and the evening built another silver road, and when night arrived a chorus of small sounds surrounded her and told her without words that rest is always ready. She let the chorus sing while she drifted, and she drifted while the chorus sang, and by the time the tide turned in the dark she had gone so softly into sleep that even the sand grains were proud of their quiet. She breathed with the sea, and the sea breathed with her, and every breath was a small bright shell set gently upon the shore of her mind until the shore grew smooth, and the shells turned into soft sand, and the soft sand promised to hold her without asking for anything in return. She remembered the glimmer of fins and the green fire that woke in the cove, and she remembered the long rooms of calm water, and she remembered that patience is a boat that never leaks, and that trust is an oar that never grows heavy. When she thought of morning she smiled, and when she thought of the long blue she smiled again, and then she let smiling become the kind of rest that does not move the face at all. She breathed with the sea, and the sea breathed with her, and every breath was a small bright shell set gently upon the shore of her mind until the shore grew smooth, and the shells turned into soft sand, and the soft sand promised to hold her without asking for anything in return. She remembered the glimmer of fins and the green fire that woke in the cove, and she remembered the long rooms of calm water, and she remembered that patience is a boat that never leaks, and that trust is an oar that never grows heavy. When she thought of morning she smiled, and when she thought of the long blue she smiled again, and then she let smiling become the kind of rest that does not move the face at all. She breathed with the sea and the sea breathed with her, and every breath was a small bright shell set gently upon the shore of her mind until the shore grew smooth and the shells turned into soft sand, and the soft sand promised to hold her without asking for anything in return. She remembered the glimmer of fins and the green fire that woke in the cove, and she remembered the long rooms of calm water, and she remembered that patience is a boat that never leaks and that trust is an oar that never grows heavy. When she thought of morning she smiled, and when she thought of the long blue she smiled again, and then she let smiling become the kind of rest that does not move the face at all.